Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line from London by the author and international affairs analyst, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz. Dr. Laskiewicz, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We missed you, actually, because you've been traveling, so good to have you back. Have more details emerged about today's trilateral session in Geneva, or for that matter, yesterday's? I mean, can we safely assume that nothing was agreed?
As far as can be told from the announcement, nothing substantial has been agreed, except perhaps there may be another exchange of prisoners, which is, of course, the minimum that they can do. Both sides remain irreconcilable in their goals, and therefore, what is happening is that there is no real progress. However, it should be noted President Donald Trump should be congratulated for bringing the sides together. And it is said that the Ukrainians and Russians did meet together bilaterally even for 1.5 hours, all of which are moves of some sort.
Indeed, a bilateral meeting certainly sounds like progress. It's interesting that the US envoy, Steve Witkoff, used that word progress, saying that it's been made at those talks, but the Ukrainians are wary, saying the Americans are putting undue pressure on them to make concessions. I mean, is it difficult to identify any middle ground that's been achieved, any constructiveness so far to these talks?
There does not appear to be anything like that yet achieved, but you're quite right in saying that Ukraine has been complaining that USA is pressurizing it to cede territory. Please note, even if the Ukrainian delegation were to agree, it still needs a referendum, which is most unlikely to succeed. And therefore, in this respect, Mr. Witkoff's optimism appears not to be justified. I would suspect that he's very optimistic because, in a sense, perhaps his career also hinges on these talks succeeding to some degree. So I think actually he's talking up as opposed to reporting the true situation.
I'm rather inclined to agree with you. And there is this Ukrainian fear that President Trump is willing to sell them out in order to secure a deal with Russia. Indeed, President Zelensky said recently that Vladimir Putin had offered the Americans $12 trillion worth of deals once the war is over. What do you make of all that?
I think President Zelensky is quite right. There is such a possibility. And in fact, it's been there almost from the moment President Donald Trump took power. It hasn't happened up till now, so the possibility is not a high probability, but it exists. And the fact that Ukraine is being pressurized by Steve Witkoff actually, if you like, also agrees with this analysis. The key point about the 12 trillion is it's not quite clear how he arrived at this figure. However, he has offered it, and this is very much what Donald Trump likes to hear. So although there is not a high probability, if you like, of President Donald Trump pressurizing Ukraine into surrender, it is a possibility. And yes, President Zelensky is quite right to draw attention to this.
And what's your sense, Dr. Laskiewicz, of how it is for Ukraine in terms of the front line at the moment? Are they having any successes at all?
The success is even holding on, which they're doing very well. And therefore, from this point of view, although the war is continuing, they are not losing any more at present. And therefore, this is a success in that respect. For Russia, it's, of course, very frustrating because unquestionably, President Putin would like a breakthrough, but there's none in the offing as far as one can tell.
Well, let me take you a bit more on that Russian perspective, because we understand that Elon Musk has found a way to switch off the Starlink terminals used by the Russians, and that appears to be causing them real problems and affecting their operational capacities in terms of the use of drones and all the rest of it. What are you hearing about that?
That is quite correct. Starlink is the key because it gives them real-time information. Once that was switched off, the Russians are fighting blind, which is why I think there have been no successes recently. It follows that whoever has a link to Starlink has a very big advantage. At present, Russia lacks this, and hence, as I stated, there's no immediate breakthrough in the offing as far as one can tell.
And I mean, you mentioned earlier that nettlesome question of the Ukrainians being pressured to give up land to Russia. Is it fair to say that for the Ukrainians, giving up territory that they've fought, bled, and died for, and haven't really lost to the Russians, is almost impossibly difficult to imagine, let alone do?
Quite right. The two sides remain irreconcilable. Just why Ukraine should give up territory it hasn't even lost is certainly going to be a difficult one. On the other hand, Russia, don't forget, please, President Putin is a dictator, cannot lose. He must win. Dictators who lose don't stay in power. So you have these two goals, and as a result, the talks would appear to be ultimately futile, except, of course, that at least there's two sides are talking and there may be an exchange of prisoners.
Well, you mentioned the futility of the talks. Let me get your summary once again. Given all that we've talked about this evening, as well as the trilateral talks in Geneva, do you see any signs of this war ending anytime soon?
No, because there are no immediate grounds for a peace deal of any sort. The talks about ceasefires are in thin air because neither Russia will refuse to give a ceasefire unless it has these territorial acquisitions. And so therefore, in the immediate future, there isn't any, but neither side can afford to do so because neither side wants to annoy President Donald Trump. And so there will be talks, and may will be talks for quite some time, repeated every so often with exactly the same result, some exchange of prisoners.
Well, I mean, that sounds just enormously disappointing, given the numbers we heard earlier of, Russian dead, wounded, casualties, and all the rest of it. I mean, 1.2 million in the last 4 years.
Yeah, we have to be careful with these statistics. I wouldn't believe any statistics out of Russia. They could well be higher, they could be lower. On the whole, I would agree that they are high, but the problem is Russia's been down this road before when it's fought the Poles or the Germans or the Swedes or the Tatars. They're not actually statistics which will impact in any particular way on President Putin. As a nation, Russia just likes winning and coûte que coûte, as the French say, and therefore, per se, this is not actually the key point. The key point is, can Russia win? And indeed, please remember just what President Putin's ambitions are, because after Ukraine will come Poland. And so therefore, as far as I can see, not only will this war continue, but the question is quite what President Putin is planning in the future, quite possibly immediate future.
Well, I mean, you mentioned Poland there, Dr. Laskiewicz, without putting you on the spot. I know you traveled to Poland recently and you were giving talks there. I mean, what were you telling them? Because, I mean, you just mentioned now that you reckon that after Ukraine, Poland is going to be next.
Yes, but in Poland, it will be a nuclear war, tactical nuclear war by Russia in order to break the Poles. They don't see the Poles as fellow Russians as they see the Ukrainians. And therefore, it will most likely be a win for them. And what I stated in Poland was, because no compromise is possible, and because the West insisted on expanding eastwards and is still doing so in that sense, it follows that the last possibility is that a buffer state could be set up on the frontier between Poland and Russia, so there is no direct point of contact between them. And it's this which I pointed out, is this which I stated should be the next step.
But I mean, surely if Russia attacked Poland, which is a NATO country with nuclear weapons, that's essentially the end of Russia.
Why? Why should anyone reply? Please remember, it will be a local bombardment. America nuked Japan. India and Pakistan were prepared to exchange nuclear missiles at one point in the very near past. There's nothing all that much about nukes. Stalin himself stated a nuke is simply a bigger bomb, and the Americans regard a nuke as a bigger bang for your buck. It's not actually that impossible. And incidentally, NATO is not a cast iron treaty. Clause 5 states that the country will reply or retaliate only to the degree it so judges, which could be zero. And therefore, as a result, the war could continue there. much worse, it may turn into a battleground, because if Russia and NATO are to fight anywhere, they need a good flat battleground between them, the country that doesn't fully belong to either the West or to Russia, and that is Poland.
Well, on that ominous note, I want to say thank you very much indeed, and welcome back. Dr. Marek Laskiewicz is the author and international affairs analyst. He was talking to me on the line there from London.